My name is Allison Gannett, and this is me 5 years ago. And, oh, thank you. It goes forward. Big green button. Awesome. So yes, my journey with cancer, and I never thought, everybody's always got this great big fear that you could possibly get cancer, and I think if you haven't dealt with cancer yourself, you have a loved one that is dealing with cancer. And so it's 1 out of 2 people almost right now have cancer, and it's a bit scary. I never thought it would be me, of course. You never do think it's going to be you, but in 2013 I had this baseball, softball-sized tumor. You can see a little dent in the middle of my head where there's a big scar on the top of my head where they removed the tumor. It wasn't a completely successful surgery, and I sure looked beautiful right after it. But it's almost my 5-year anniversary at this conference today. So when you're given only 6.5 months to live, and you change your entire life because you want to be a fighter and you want to live, and I promised I wasn't going to cry, but I'm going to cry. I'm alive today, and I say that every day that I don't look at a hospital ceiling is a good day. So I think a lot of my tenacity came from the fact that actually, number one, I was a fat, dorky math geek when I was a kid, always overweight, always struggling with my weight. And then I think I overcompensated it with becoming addicted to exercise. And I ended up becoming a world champion extreme skier, I think completely overcompensating for my fat, dorky self as a child. I think this gave me the tenacity and the fearlessness to take a path that wasn't traveled, because when I asked my doctors if I did surgery, chemo, and radiation, would I be alive in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? And they said, no, there's no cure for your cancer. But we're going to do double the chemo, and we're going to do double the radiation, and that's going to help. And it wasn't the answer that I wanted to hear. And luckily, I found my doctor who said, we're going to get you on the ketogenic diet, and we're going to find out the root causes of your cancer, and we're going to reverse them one by one. And being a climate change scientist, being a scientist, I understood the systematics of tracking for success, and it made sense to me to not just be blowing in the wind waiting for the cancer to blow up and kill me, that I wanted to be strategic in finding out why I got cancer. So I was lucky that at the time when I got cancer, I had moved to our farm and was growing and raising all my own food, including wheat and corn and barley and rice and all those non-keto foods. So I was thinking that I was being healthy. I was eating all organic, fresh foods raised at my own farm. And meanwhile, I had cancer. And the type of cancer that I had is very, very driven by a couple things: sugar and stress. So immediately, I had to rip out everything in the garden and try to plant keto foods and change my whole life. And a lot of people think, like, oh, I don't have cancer. People ask me every day, are you in remission? It's amazing that every day our body makes 500 to 2,000 cancer cells. Every single person in this room has that same thing going on. So every bite we take is either feeding cancer for the future or starving it. So I think of the part that they missed in my brain is a little Pac-Man that's like looking for sugar, and I'm like, I'm not going to give it to you, I'm giving you fat. So cancer is not just about keto. This is a very complex diagram. You don't have to read it all, but we have everything from hormones to sugars to stress to immune system dysfunction to viruses to emotional trauma to over-exercise, under-exercise. I could list a litany. I had pretty much every single thing on that chart that was lying under the hood, because on the outside of the surface, I was this world champion skier, finally lost all this weight, I was jumping off cliffs, I became a world champion, and meanwhile, under the hood, I was the unhealthiest person you could imagine, and I had no idea. The check engine light was on. I had some warnings with like Epstein-Barr, chronic fatigue, hormone imbalances, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, but I didn't think those combined would create the perfect storm to give me cancer. You hear a lot about mitochondria being like kind of the powerhouse of the cells, and really the biggest thing that I've learned through my keto journey, not only being a cancer survivor and thriver, but now becoming an ICANN oncology diet coach, is that it's all about repairing the mitochondria and the energy production in the cells. You don't have to understand completely what it means, but my mitochondria has gone through a complete transformation. So this slide cracked me up. I found it on the internet the other day because I have a genetic mutation that doesn't allow me to process garlic very well. I have another genetic mutation that doesn't allow me to process broccoli very well. Strawberries would put my blood sugar through the roof. Green tea, I have another mutation that doesn't allow me to process green tea. Carrots are way too sugary for me. Spinach, I can eat, and tomatoes are way too sugary for me. So what I want the takeaway to be is there's all these superfoods that everybody says, do this, it fights cancer. You know, when I got diagnosed, we were in the grocery store just grabbing all these foods that supposedly fought cancer. And meanwhile, I had no idea that you have to really customize your diet for your DNA and for your blood work. And the number one takeaway is there's no one-size-fits-all keto, there's no one-size-fits-all diet. And be careful for all these things that you read about, you know, you gotta eat sour cherries, etc. This is not my keto. I always crack up when people are like, oh, you eat bacon and eggs for breakfast. I am focusing on getting 5 to 9 cups of vegetables in my diet, low glycemic vegetables, and high fat. Bacon and eggs is actually not high enough fat for me, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. The gift that has become cancer is that all my conditions have reversed. My rheumatoid arthritis, my polycystic ovarian disease, my Hashimoto's, I had chronic yeast infections, chronic bladder infections, chronic immune dysfunction, I had virus problems, estrogen problems, you name it, I had it. And I'm proud to say that today, they're all gone. Completely. And if you ever get a thermogram, you want to have blue boobies. So I went from these estrogen red and yellow and white patterns of pre-cancer for breast cancer, and now they're all gone. And the doctors are like, wow, we've never seen that happen before. So how do I track this? You don't have to read this slide, but with myself and my clients, I track about anywhere from 50 to 70 blood markers a month. And tracking equals success. So if I am eating a certain amount of protein, currently it's 43 grams of protein a day, and then my protein comes back high or low, then I know I have to adjust what I'm eating that month to have optimal protein. Because too much protein for cancer can convert to glucose. So that's just one of the markers. The first 3 markers are what we call the trifecta. And those markers I track for myself and my clients like a hawk. And that's HSCRP, C-reactive protein, sedimentation rate, or ESR, and lactate dehydrogenase. And anybody out there who's doctors know those are all markers of inflammation. Inflammation is a great marker of mitochondrial damage. So we're tracking for success. My doctor always says test, assess, and redress. And it's a constant feedback. I have thousands and millions of labs. Dave Feldman and I can have a lab off. And, you know, that's what's made the difference for me and my family when I chose not to do chemo and radiation. Once they saw how scientific my doctor's approach was to keto and beyond, it really brought them into the fold and made them realize, like, hey, she's not on some hippy-dippy, oovy-groovy cancer kick. It's scientific. This is a chart of my DNA, and we're going to talk a lot about DNA because I really think it plays a lot into how my lab work is expressing itself. And with my clients, I don't know of anybody that's doing keto diet coaching like myself using blood work, patient history, and DNA all together, because I think it's really important that no stone is unturned. You know, you don't want to get cancer because you missed out that you had a caffeine, inability to process caffeine. So how do you start? Of course, you know, as a diet coach, I have to say check with your doctor. You're very, very unlikely to get support from your oncologist. I don't really bring up the topic with my oncologist very often because I learned through this journey that an oncologist can actually lose their license if they recommend keto to a client like myself. They can only recommend surgery, chemo, radiation, and a clinical trial. If they deviate from that, the American Medical Association can pull their license. And so it's okay. You know, I love my oncologist, I love my neurosurgeon, but I also have a naturopathic doctor, an integrative doctor. I also have a masseuse. I also have acupuncture. I have a whole team. And the most important person of my team is Dr. Nasha Winters, and we're going to talk about her. It's very easy to get overwhelmed when you start keto. As you guys all know, you've probably been through the journey yourself. So make it fun and bring in the whole family. I really couldn't have done this without the support from my husband and my family that all went keto with me. So how many people use Chronometer? Anybody here? A few. So how many people use MyFitnessPal? Several. So if you have cancer, I would suggest switching over to Chronometer because you can set it up for therapeutic keto, which is way different than what I call internet keto, right? Internet keto is going to be 65, 70% fat, whereas therapeutic keto for cancer is going to be 85 to 90% fat. So if you go on Chronometer, you set up your height, your weight, how much weight you want to lose, how much weight you want to gain. Then you can set up your meals. I also find that it's very important to track certain things like exercise, sleep, how I'm feeling, what medications I'm taking to see if my labs are out of range in the future month. I can go back into Chronometer and see what I did wrong. Did I get too much exercise? Not enough. Did I get good sleep, bad sleep? In February, my labs were terrible, and they've been really, really good for 4 years, and it was because I went back in my diary, I skied too much, and my inflammation got very, very high. So I could have freaked out and be like, oh my gosh, I have cancer, but I knew that my diet was great, I knew my sleep was great, and the only thing that had changed was exercise. So you can track your calories, and I think it's very important to look at the little part that says full macronutrient breakdown. Do you guys see that? Does this have a pointer? Oh, back. You want to set it for high-fat ketogenic, and do you see how I have the little box checked that says rigorous? And then you want 20 grams of total carbs per day. And that's because everybody metabolizes carbs differently. If you don't know how you metabolize fiber, you can make a mistake here by tracking net carbs versus total carbs. And then very important on the box that says show your weight goal, and this is true for anybody who wants to prevent cancer as well as conquer cancer, is the Chronometer automatically adjusts your caloric intake and your fat for if you want to gain weight, lose weight, or maintain weight. And we're going to talk more about that, but it's really a great feature. You don't have to sit there and calculate what your lean body mass is. It does it automatically for you. Takes a lot of the complications out of it. So then once you enter your foods, this box is one of my favorites. It's halfway down the page, and I find that, again, internet keto is like eat avocados, steak, bacon, eggs, and nuts. That is not keto for cancer. Those are all high in carbs. Not eggs necessarily, but I think of bacon as a protein. I think of eggs as a protein. If I'm thinking of an egg and I'm thinking keto for cancer, I'm cooking 1 egg in 4 tablespoons of keto fat. So it's not 2 eggs and 1 tablespoon of fat. It's the other way around. So I'm always trying to have 4 times as much fat as I do carbs and protein, as a general rule. The other thing is I have different keto fats in every meal, and I have different keto vegetables in every meal. So this is kind of a random snapshot of a day of my eating, and I've got to look at this closely. So for breakfast, it looks like I had a frittata with bacon and lots of fat and lots of vegetables. And then dinner, I had a salad, hamburger, deep-fried mustard greens and beet greens. And I always cook like my hamburger in 1 keto fat. Then I'm going to deep fry my leafy greens in another keto fat. And then I'm going to have salad dressing with another keto fat. So like last night at dinner or at lunch yesterday, I just sneak in my keto fats and dump it on top, because usually it's protein and vegetable, but there's just not enough fat, especially for cancer. So this is, you don't have to read it all, but if you want to, this is kind of my typical day, not in Chronometer, what you just saw. I think the real big takeaway for me is deep frying at least 1 food per meal in a keto fat. And I have a big stock pot on the stove that has, a cup or 2 of some type of keto fat. And I just love making like fried chicken or fish sticks or chicken fried steak or fried Swiss chard leaves or things like that. It's really key for people with cancer, because a lot of people with cancer need to gain weight. And so if we don't get the fats up, then they just continually lose weight. So cachexia is a condition that a lot of people get when they have cancer, especially after cancer treatments like chemo and radiation. It's a muscle wasting disease. I'm sure you've all seen it when cancer patients get really, really skinny. What we've found is Western medicine actually doesn't have a cure for cachexia. What we do is I put people on a very, very high fat diet, 300, 400, even 500 grams of fat a day. I up their protein just slightly, but maybe to 1.2 or 1.5 grams of protein per lean body mass, and then really load them up on fatty, I wouldn't even call them desserts. I call it my dairy-free ApoE ice cream, my popsicles. I have this amazing coffee creamer that I teach people to make that makes really good smoothies. But all these snacks are great because they're 95% fat. And I love the keto diet because, I had 3 brownies and a cup of ice cream yesterday as my snack. And as a person who has been struggling with their weight their whole life, to be able to have brownies and ice cream every day and maintain my weight is awesome. So there's a real gift to cancer. So this is a good to see my personal example. All I do if I want to change my weight is vary the amount of fat that I've had. And I've seen a couple questions about gaining and losing weight yesterday. And this is my key. Everybody's metabolism is different. Mine is 400 to gain weight, 300 to maintain, and 200 to lose weight. But then if I have a cancer client that is maybe 250 pounds, she's going to want to eat 125 grams of fat because she's going to be using her body fat as the extra to get to 85% fat. So you don't have to eat 85% fat to be burning 85% fat. So when I started, my fat goals were quite low because I needed to lose a bunch of weight. And now I also got very, very skinny 3 years ago on keto, so I really had to up my fats to maintain my weight. This is a cool feature of Chronometer. You can see that if you click on the word lunch, do you see how that turns purple? Then you can actually see the calorie breakdown of that meal. And do you see that little circle in the bottom right corner of the graphic that says calorie breakdown? The red part is how much fat it is. If you hover your mouse over that, every meal has to be 85, 5, 10. Not just like, oh, I'm going to have all my fats for breakfast, then I'm going to have my carbs for lunch, and then I'm going to have a lot of protein for dinner. The body doesn't work that way. It needs to be either feeding cancer or starving cancer at every meal and every snack. So that's kind of a nice little nugget. I mentioned about proteins. We can't overeat proteins when it comes to keto for cancer and keto to prevent cancer. So I encourage everybody to look at their labs, and if you get lab work done, it'll say total protein in your lab. And you want to shoot for preventing cancer or conquering cancer to have it be 7.1, 7.2, 7.3. So those keto carnivores, I would love to see what their total protein numbers look like and see if they're going over. Ferritin is a good measure of how you're doing on your protein. A lot of cancer patients have extremely high ferritin or extremely low ferritin. This can be related to the HFE, genetic hemochromatosis gene. So genetics can be in play, but cancer also creates an extracellular environment that they create high ferritin. So if cancer is active, we will often see high ferritin. You can use a simple supplement called artemisinin to bring the ferritin down. And if people have really solid blood work, we actually encourage them to do a therapeutic blood draw to pull the iron, the ferritin, back into range. For people who have cancer, a blood transfusion can actually be deadly because cancer loves ferritin, and if you have a blood transfusion, you have a massive amount of ferritin thrown into the body. So my doctor has a whole slew of things that she does instead of that. I raise cows, I raise pigs, I raise chickens, so you are what you eat. If your pig ate GMO corn and you have cancer, that's a problem. So you really have to pay attention to the quality of your proteins, the quality of your seafood. And this is true for all of us because we want to get those toxins out of our body. Preventing cancer is key. My farmer's market trick is one of the best ones I have because I'm a farmer. So I go out and pick a whole bunch of greens and I put them in one bag, and that's my stir-fry greens, so all the greens that can be cooked. And then I pick another bag that's all my salad greens. And so the nice thing is there's probably 20 different varieties in each of those bags. And so in my fridge for vegetables, I have the bag of stir-fry greens and the bag of lettuce greens. And so anytime I need to make noodles, I'm going to grab the stir-fry greens and I'm going to slice them really thinly and throw them and make like macaroni and cheese out of them, or I'm going to make a soup out of them. It's a really easy way to do keto, and when I travel with the greens too. If you have genetic mutations, CBS or BHMT, which I do, it has an inability to process cruciferous vegetables, and they always say cruciferous vegetables are great for cancer. Well, for me, I need to do a workaround, so I take 5-methylfolate, and that helps my genetics be able to absorb the nutrition from things like kale. But in the beginning, kale was actually causing part of my cancer, and that's a whole nother story you can corner me about. So low-carb veggies, ultra-low-carb veggies, I put here on the list of the things. Pretty much all of my foods are in the very low-carb range. Every now and then I'll have a treat of like broccoli or cauliflower, but in general, broccoli or cauliflower are going to throw my ketones from like 3 to 5 to like 0.5 or 1. And for ketones for cancer, we'll be talking about how high they want to be. It depends on the person. But really rotating your vegetables. You don't want to be eating the same thing every day. You want to be trying new things and experimenting. So you can ask around at your farmer's market, who is a farmer like Allison, and can you do 2 big bags of greens for me that I pick up once a week? It's a lot cheaper, and it's a lot fresher, it's seasonal, and it's delicious. So nuts generally throw me out of ketosis, because I want to have my ketones from 3 to 6. Peely nuts are the only nut that doesn't throw me out of ketosis. Sometimes I'll have a few pecans, sometimes I'll have a few macadamias, but they're always going to be in a recipe with a lot of fat. I actually wouldn't sit down and eat a bag of peely nuts. I would make them into a peely nut bread with lots of fat in it. So this is a big one because a lot of people, they love nuts. They also are like, well, if I can't do nuts, then I'm going to do a lot of seeds. Almost all seeds mimic estrogen, and cancer loves estrogen. And we really don't want to have seeds eaten on a daily basis unless they're being used as a medicine. If you have genes CYP1A1, CYP1B2, COMT, or MTHFR, then you're like an estrogen sponge. That would be me. And my doctor always famously said, Allison, if you hadn't gotten brain cancer, you would have gotten 1 million cancers in here that are all driven by estrogen. So fats, I try to stick to the real fats that have 0 carbs on the right side of the screen. I'm not going to have any of the fats on the left side of the screen. And you really want to customize your fats for what kind of genetics that you have. And really vary your fats. You should not be having the same fat at every meal. You should really have 3 different keto fats at each meal. So this is a very important slide for those of us with ApoE4, ApoE34, ApoE44, another gene called ACSL1, and another gene called ApoA2. So I basically have to eat almost all monosaturated fats and no dairy because of my genetics for ApoE34, and I also have ACSL1 and ApoA2. Even if you have just one of those genes, you're going to want to shift into the monosaturated fats. And everybody, as we know, wants to avoid PUFAs, which we call polyunsaturated fatty acids. So vegetable oils that are not on the good list should be avoided like the plague for inflammation, mitochondria, and preventing cancer. So I love getting the fats up. It's a really good problem to have, to be eating brownies and ice cream. And Lecanto is a sugar substitute that I use, and because it's the only one that my husband thinks tastes good. And I love making ice cream. I really enjoy my brownies. And because I can't do dairy, my ice cream recipe has been a lifesaver for me. And my coffee creamer, I should probably market it, but you probably couldn't because it's all made out of fresh eggs and really good fats. It would be hard to, I have to freeze it to travel and bring it with me. Oh, and another important thing is make sure you don't enter your sweetener in Chronometer because it'll falsely show your carbs being too high. With all my clients that I haven't seen anybody have a raise in blood sugar with erythritol. So I generally recommend the erythritol. So whether you can do dairy or not is going to completely depend on your genetics. So you want to look if you have the LCT gene, you want to look if you have ApoA2, if you have ACSL1, or ApoE34 or 44. If you have any of those genetics, like me, sorry, it's so sad, I can't do dairy. But my liver enzymes and my triglycerides have gotten much, much, much lower once I found out I had those genes and changed my keto diet. Intermittent fasting, as you've heard yesterday, I do totally agree that bulletproof coffee throws you out of intermittent fasting. I used to be like, oh, it's not a big deal. But then my lab work was just showing that it was a big deal. So I completely went to very, very strict intermittent fasting. My first calories at noon, my last calories at 6 p.m. And I can't believe how much my labs have changed, and same with those of my clients. So if you have any of the genetics that really encourage intermittent fasting, which was the last slide, or if you have keto for cancer, the important thing is with the intermittent fasting is when we're not eating, our body is doing repair and it's taking out the trash. So if we give it a break from eating, then it can help get those bad cancer cells out of the body, and that's what we want. Alcohol, generally not allowed until my clients' labs are stable. If their labs are stable, then small amounts of dry farm wine or good tequila, something like that, is fine. I cheated and had a little glass of wine last night. It was about my first one in 6 months. It was delicious. And caffeine, you have to look at your genetics and see if you have the CYP1A2-164AC gene. If you have the AA allele, you can do coffee, but you can't do Tylenol. If you have the AC or the CC gene, like I have, then coffee is out. Caffeine is out for you, which I unfortunately have. It's a bummer. I think my hardest thing is not being able to do coffee. Everything else is pretty easy. For travel, make anything keto. I have these little like baby food jars or mini mason jars, and I puree in the blender some type of keto fat, some type of herb, some type of shallot or garlic, maybe a little hot sauce, and I freeze them in these little jars, and I travel with them in my purse. I also have a cooler that I put into my luggage and put inside my wheelie bag, and I check a cooler full of food when I travel. So last night I was very unprepared, but we had steak and chicken and fish, and we had cauliflower, which is high in carbs for me. We had salad, but I didn't have my fat. I really needed to dump my fat on top of that to make it 85% fat, because what I ate last night was too high in protein for conquering cancer. Ketone testing, I use either the Keto Mojo or the Level. They're both here today. And I think it's really important that the numbers that you're getting for these are much higher than keto for weight loss, let's say. I try to get my ketones on Keto Mojo somewhere between 3 and 5 because I have a very deadly cancer. Level yesterday, I had a fun one. Anybody blow in that here? So I had one test at 31, which is very low for me. And then I ate my keto lunch that I brought my keto fats, and I blew a 132. So I challenge anybody to see if they can beat me on that one. Glucose ketone index, has anybody heard of this? Awesome, because sometimes your ketones can go up, but your blood glucose is still high, and that's often due to stress. But we want to make sure that there's nothing that can possibly be feeding cancer. So we want to have low blood sugar, often in the 60s, and after you eat a meal, you should have your blood sugar still in the 60s. So that's what we're aiming for cancer. It takes a while to get there. And on Heads Up Health, they're here as well. They have a very nice, easy calculator that can calculate this glucose ketone index for you. So for cancer people, want to have their GKI be less than 1. Supplemental ketones, you saw Maria Emmerich's speech about how if you have supplemental ketones, your body isn't burning your own body fat. So I actually don't use any supplemental ketones. I love that Dr. Stephen Finney told me that my body makes 100 grams of ketones a day. Why would I buy any? It's so true. Like, let your body do its job. There's 4 different kinds of ketones that your body makes. If you have supplemental ketones, you're only getting 1. And the other thing is if your blood glucose is high, which for a cancer patient it almost always is, if you take supplemental ketones, it simulates a dangerous condition called ketone acidosis. So you don't want to have high glucose and high ketones. You want to have your body be making your own ketones. I think the most important part for me is that keto has to be amazingly delicious. I'm a real foodie. I was a foodie before I got cancer. I was a junk food junkie when I was a kid and when I was overweight, but then I found food. I love food. I spend every day like inventing new keto recipes that are delicious. And it's so much fun to cook and enjoy food and eat like the French do, you know, where you're pouring tons of hollandaise sauce and béarnaise sauce, and you can have tons of ice cream and all these fatty foods. They called it the French paradox. Why are these French people eating all this fat and they're a normal weight people? It's because they eat high fat, and fat makes all our hormones, and hormones often drive cancer. So load on the fats and really enjoy it. And it took me a long time to realize that if I ate 2.5 cups of fat a day, that I could lose weight and look normal. Like, to wrap your head around the fact that you're cooking with that much fat and you're not gaining weight, that's a hard thing at first. So phases of keto, this is probably my most important slide. So if you want to take a picture of something, this is the one. A lot of people goof up and think that cancer for keto, if I've been doing it for 2 weeks, I'm going to go in and get a PET scan and all my cancer's gone. It's just not, it doesn't happen that way. For me, it took me 48 years to give myself cancer, and it took me about 18 months to reverse the effects of the metabolic disease that I had. You can see my scans here going from left to right. That's what the estrogen looked like in my belly in a thermogram. And then it took almost 18 months for that estrogen to be emptied out of the body. So what I learned in the beginning was, at first I was doing a ketogenic diet with about 1/2 cup of fat a day. And in the middle slide is when I upped it to 1 cup of fat a day. And the slide on the right is when I upped it to 2 cups of fat a day. So the more fat I did and I kept the carbs the same, the more beneficial effects that happened in my body. Now, a lot of people get to the keto detox phase, don't check their insulin. So keto detox doesn't happen until your insulin is below 3. Remember, people were talking about insulin yesterday, and we heard numbers of like 13, 14. Well, your old white fat cells, the bad ones, don't open up to provide ketones, this is what I've read, until your insulin is below 3. When your insulin gets below 3, that exchange starts to happen from white fat cells to brown fat cells. So that is when you start to feel bad on keto. Internet keto at 65% fat will never get you to that point, so you never have this weird phase where you all of a sudden start smelling weird, you get weird bumps on your body, you get rashes, you feel like maybe you're going through menopause if you're even a guy. And that's all the hormones coming out, all the toxins coming out, and all the old blood sugars that you've stored throughout your life are coming out of your body in that phase. And that's often, takes at least 3 to 6 months for that phase to start. And for some people, it takes a year. So that's why a lot of my clients often quit keto at a certain point, because they're like, I was doing great. I felt really, really good. And then I started to feel terrible. And that's because of the keto detox phase. So for me, I didn't see the real positive things on my scans for 18 months of keto. So you got to stay strong and stick with it. Track your labs to know that you're doing a good job. Use thermograms and other scans to know that you're doing a good job. So testing, we talked about this in the beginning. These are all the lab markers that I test. Test, assess, redress. Make sure you're not leaving this to chance. If those first 3 labs are out of range, you need to talk to your diet coach or your oncologist or your naturopath immediately, because it means your inflammation is running out of control. The nice thing about labs is we can check things when they're simmering and not when they've gone like full on into a cancering process. And so that's where a healthy person can use a lab spreadsheet like this to make sure your keto diet is healthy for you, because every single person is different. So these are the terrain 10. In the beginning, I talked about the different reasons for cancer. This is the summary of the 10 different main reasons my Dr. Nasha looks at for cancer. I had every single one of them. And if you want to learn more about this, about why keto is not enough, you want to go read her book, The Metabolic Approach to Cancer. It's phenomenal. Also, quick mention for stress. Everybody knows that stress raises cortisol, cortisol raises insulin, and causes a glucose response. I was eating perfect keto at about year 3, and because I'm a bit of a stressaholic from some of my genes, like COMT, I have a very high stress response. And I finally had to start meditation and learning how to meditate because my diet was perfect, but my stress was causing my blood sugar to go through the roof. So don't underestimate stress. The other thing is that exercise, I didn't know this, when you are sore, when you have lactic acid is going to convert to glucose. So I never exercised to the point of soreness anymore. And pretty much my whole life, I used to be a chronic cardio person. I am now a walk the dog person. I'm going to prioritize meditating and being outside in nature versus exercise because exercise can be inflammatory if there's too much exercise or not enough. It's right in the middle where we want to be for cancer. And high-intensity interval training is fantastic for cancer. So in conclusion, jumping off of cliffs was pretty easy. Cancer really sucked. But I now can say that it's probably one of the biggest gifts I've been given because I can help other people with cancer, and I've helped my whole family to prevent cancer. And I love having the power of getting older. I feel better now in my 50s than I did when I was 30 or 40. I never knew how to fix my health, and now I know every single thing about my health to the T, way more so than any of my doctors know, except for Dr. Nasha. So that's really empowering, and because I have genetics for Alzheimer's and heart disease, by going keto for cancer, I'm not going to die of heart disease and Alzheimer's, so that's awesome. So I'm glad you can be here to celebrate my 5-year anniversary because I just am so glad every day to be alive. And, it wasn't going to be that way. And keto saved my life. And it's saving my family's lives. And you guys can use it to prevent cancer. And we're going to all live long, happy lives and die of old age. So thank you. Wow, I'm on time too. We have a habit. All right, so I guess we have time for questions? Questions?
Hi, Allison.
Hi.
You're such an inspiration. Sorry, you got me teared up. My husband and I, we just celebrated my husband's 5-year as well.
Wow,
so,
yay.
Yeah, and cancer's been a blessing on our family as well, which is, it really has. You got to take the positive. Anyway, on to my question. Do you do anything with diving into your clients with cancer, with the actual specific cancer and the cancer metabolism, and what it could possibly fuel off of? Like my husband's cancer does not show up on a PET scan, and it's very rare, and they don't have a lot of research on it as well.
That's how mine was too. Mine was very rare, and they didn't have much research on it. I mean, getting the tumor pathology, looking at the client's history, it usually, if you do a combination of, I do a 35-page intake form, then the blood markers, I would run everything on him, and then all the DNA, you can put the puzzle together of what's going on. The tumor pathology does help, but it's usually not the biggest driver because tumors morph, right? So as soon as you tackle one tumor, like I would have died of breast cancer next, right? So I couldn't avoid, brain cancer, my type, wasn't estrogen driven. So normally a doctor would say, oh, Allison, you can eat whatever estrogens you want. Well, I'm trying to be optimally healthy so that I wouldn't get breast cancer or ovarian cancer. So we're trying to put together the puzzle so that you have optimal health. If you have optimal health, you have absence of disease. And so it's fun. It really is a fun game to put it together.
I suppose, and it all comes back down to the mitochondrial health.
It's mitochondria, but you have to look at thyroid. You have to look at virus testing. You have to look at hormones. You have to look at blood sugars. You have to look, that terrain 10 that I put up there, no stone unturned, the way I look at it, to get all of those things off the checklist. And my doctor has a famous saying. I say, well, if you have a 70% success rate with curing cancer, what are the 30% that die? And she said, they'll have one thing of their terrain 10. Like a good example was this woman who had a really bad relationship with her husband. She needed to divorce him. She didn't have the strength to deal with that. And it ultimately was her demise because it was the emotional health that was draining her mitochondria. Other times, I have people that are doing everything perfectly, but they won't leave a stressful job. And so you just have to make sure you're not missing something. You don't want to all of a sudden wake up 5 or 10 years later and you've got some reoccurrence. And so I am testing. I don't want to be a statistic. I'm just going to be the healthiest person I can be. And I learn something every time I run my labs. I learn something new. So it's exciting.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Hi, Allison. Thanks for being here. I appreciate your presentation and congratulations on your 5-year.
Thank you.
5 years of being cancer-free. I too am a cancer survivor, 14 years breast cancer survivor, and mine was hormone negative, but it was a HER2 positive, which is a protein that makes it a much more aggressive cancer. And so I was in treatment. I had surgery and treatment for 18 months. So it's possible that my breast cancer could come back, and it could be a hormone-related one. So I'm trying to do everything I can to not get cancer again.
I'm with you. We do everything we can, and that's what keeps us positive, right? Is to think about what we can do, not what we can't do.
The interesting thing about my breast cancer was that there's no family history. And I've had my DNA done, and I don't have the breast cancer genes. That just came out with 23andMe.
We don't care about that, actually.
But I do have other genetic mutations, MTHFR, COMT, MTR.
I was going to guess that you had all those.
And I'm not sure, but maybe CBS. I can't remember that one. But I just wondered, should I be looking at more of a therapeutic ketogenic diet than just a keto diet in order to avoid future instances?
Yeah, I would, look at all your labs. Make sure that your inflammation levels are really low. Make sure that your, those first 3 labs that I had mentioned. You also really want to look at insulin, fasting insulin, to have it below 3. So you're going to want to adjust your ketogenic diet to keep your fasting insulin below 3, because breast cancer loves stress, hormones, and sugar, and low vitamin D3. So obviously, every single part of the terrain 10 plays into any cancer, but those 4 are really important for particularly breast cancer. And I see a lot of low levels of vitamin D3 across the board.
My inflammation last August was 12.1. In March, I dropped it down to 5.3.
Nice. Is that HSCRP?
I have a ways to go, but I'm supplementing with methylated B vitamins and some other things, so trying to work on that.
Yeah, and you're going to work to get your HSCRP below 1.
Right.
And your sedimentation rate, ESR, below 5.
Yeah, I haven't done that, and I have that written down.
And the lactate dehydrogenase, depending on the lab, either below 450 or 175. But then really look at your blood glucose numbers and your vitamin D3. And, if you can even rewind and look at all the lab markers that I put on there, because I have the ranges for optimal health versus the ranges for Western medicine. And we really want to shoot for not Western medicine ranges. We want to do better than that.
Yeah, I want to get your presentation so I can look at those things and have a record of it. So thank you so much.
Yeah, and you can contact me if you need help.
I will. Thank you very much.
Allison Gannett, ladies and gentlemen. Allison Gannett. Now, Allison will be over in the Meet the Speakers section. So if anyone has questions, please meet her over there. Thank you so much.